where do social structures come from, and what is the meaning of equality within those structures? Now, here's a place, when I go to the mosque, I'm not going to speak for any of you all, I don't know you well enough. When I go to the mosque, I hear a big difference, okay? Our interlocutors, our dialogue partners, when they talk about equality, almost inevitably say, all people are equal spiritually before God. But within the social realm, people have different roles, and some of those roles are hierarchical, meaning that in the social realm, even though everybody's equal before God, the reality is that some people take orders from other people, okay? In particular, women take orders from their husbands, okay? So you have it's spiritually equal, but hierarchical in the family structure. Now, is this like a radically different viewpoint than what prevailed in the United States for right up until about 30 years ago? No, it's not like we're unfamiliar with it as Americans. This is what every human being in the world thought for most of world history, okay? But we're in a different time now, okay? And equality in the strictly American sense doesn't mean that I'm limited by a particular role that was given to me because of my birth, my gender, etc. Equality in this particular new American way of thinking means every single individual can be anybody, can fill any role that he or she wants to fill, literally any role. There are no role distinctions. Society and social structures are created free form by the society itself. They're not given by God. Now, you know that this is a big argument in American politics because you have this whole thing over gay marriage. And you've got people saying, no way. God made it this way. One man, one woman, that's marriage. But you have an equally strong, politically force saying, no. If two men want to both take on the role of being husband and wife, that's okay. Two women, that's okay. Think about it another way, and again, I don't want to be too indelicate, but hardly, outside of the West, the concept of a sex change operation is almost unknown. But it's really very common now, right? What if a woman decides she wants to be a man? It's a free country. She'll do it, right? Easily available, and vice versa. That's a reflection of this understanding, that I'm free to look in myself, see who I want to be, and be it, and not be told who to be, right? Not by God or anybody. Now, that's a very different view than you find among religious people of many religions who would say, no, God determines who you are, and you have to learn to live with that, even if you don't like it, right, at any particular time. Okay, that's a very big difference. That's a very big difference. Now, and again, it's a place where I think there is a need for some dialogue. At the very least, I think there's a need for dialogue that understands that when religious people, and I'll speak of religious people generally now, as opposed to simply Muslims, when religious people say that they believe that God has chosen a role for them, that's their choice of a role, right? It's still a free choice. The fact that they say it's mandated by God doesn't mean it removes it. I heard a very nice woman named Sister Wendy. I was out of the country in the 90s. Apparently she was a big deal here as an art expert, okay? But she talks about the fact that God called her to be a nun, which is to say to be celibate, to be unmarried, and to be a contemplative nun, meaning that she lives in a trailer house in the back of a place and prays for 9 hours a day. And she would say over and over, that's what God chose me to be. And so she dresses in a nun's habit. As it happens, in an interview with her, she pointed out that she shaved her head. She didn't see any point in having hair. It was just a difficult thing for her. And she's going to cover it anyway, right? But for her, that was her free choice. It was a sense of what God had chosen her role to be. Okay. Now, most religious people that I've met, including most Muslim women, have said to me, and Christian women too, by the way, I think that God wants me to fulfill this role. Right? So that's why I'm doing it. If we could understand that the self-limitation of roles may be a free choice, as free a choice as saying, I will choose to be anybody I want to be, then I think we can begin to come to some kind of understanding that what's at stake here is really freedom, and the freedom to choose. And that the difference that lies is between religious places where the authorities tell you what your role has to be and religions in which people say, within the structure of the community, I will wisely accept my peers' view of what my role is. I will choose that freely. I think that's the difference. And this comes down to the headscarf issue. Do you choose to wear one or do you not if you're a woman? Okay. The Malaysian women I know who wear a headscarf, and many who didn't, all said, yeah, I chose to. Oh, but didn't your husband force you to? Like, I'm not married. How about your mom? No, my mom hated it. That's interesting, by the way, a survey of Muslim women in Java, young Muslim women in Java. Most of them who wore a headscarf did it to rebel against their mothers who didn't. So it was hardly imposed on them. It was their way of asserting their identity vis-a-vis their more secular mothers. Okay? Now, if we can begin to recognize that there are all these motives involved, then we can begin to see that we do actually have a common interest in how humans can live freely in a community that does have norms. And that's a common question we all have, rather than just sort of saying, well, we're for freedom and you guys aren't. Okay. The truth is, every community has its norms, right? Every community has its norms. Some of them are less good than others, but I know that when I lived in Malaysia, I was very happy that the community norm was much more modest dress than I found, for example, in Austria, where there is no modesty at all. But it suited me better. But those were community norms; those were chosen. Okay, so that's the second thing. What appear to be big differences in terms of role, and are big differences in some ways. There are also similarities we can discover through dialogue, which is an interest in freedom, but freedom that is always constrained by your social setting. Right? Finally, I want to talk about a conflict between science, religion, and how you know the truth about the way the world is. Okay? Now, this is a pretty big one. The Muslim narrative, as far as I've ever read it or understood it, basically supports the idea that knowledge of the natural world and knowledge of God's law and God theology, so to speak, are seamlessly integrated. There's only one kind of knowledge of the truth, and that's God's truth. It happens that you investigate one through nature, using your mind, the other through revelation, using your mind, but you don't turn off your mind, right? They're both subject to rational investigation, and since God is the source of all truth, then there shouldn't be any contradiction between them, right? If there's a contradiction, it has to be my problem, my inability to understand, right? Now, and in a minute I'll mention some Muslim theologians today who are continuing to explore that, okay? We have to realize that the modern West and its understanding between the relationship of revealed knowledge and nature, discovered with reason, came out of a very, very different tradition than the history of Islam, okay? And that was a tradition in which, because of complex social forces at work in Europe, okay, people of a rational scientific bent began to feel increasingly in the 17th and 18th century, but actually the 16th, 17th, 18th century, that the church, remember organized religion, was opposed to rational truth. And that in fact there developed a power struggle between those who were going to use their minds to study nature and a church bureaucracy that was going to refuse to allow them to do that. And so someone like Galileo, for declaring the truth, was going to be called a heretic. And it would take the Catholic Church 350 years to decide that they were maybe wrong on that one. Okay? But bear in mind that what's going on here. This was a fight. It was a battle between religious authorities, who were the masters of revelation, and between a growing middle-class, scientific, learned community that was the master of nature and the rational approach of nature. And it was a fight for who has